They programmed you to stay small. You were not born small, you were made small, piece by piece, word by word, year by year. Somebody did this to you, and you let them, because you did not know it was happening. Listen closely. Before you could speak in full sentences, someone was already teaching you what you were allowed to become. Not with cruelty, not with malice, with comfort, with caution, with love, twisted into a cage. Be careful. Don't get your hopes up. That's not for people like us. Every single one of those sentences was a brick. And brick by brick, they built a wall around the size of your life. You call it humility. It is not humility. It is programming. You call it realism. It is not realism. It is a leash handed down from person to person, generation to generation, until nobody even remembers who tied the first knot. Think about the rooms you grew up in. Think about the dinner tables, the classrooms, the break rooms of the jobs your parents worked, jobs they hated, jobs that paid the bills and buried the dream. In those rooms, ambition was not celebrated. Ambition was suspicious. The man who dared to dream too loudly was called arrogant. The woman who worked past dark was called obsessed. The child who asked, "Why not me?" was told to sit down, to be grateful, to not get ahead of himself. You were not raised to expand. You were raised to fit into the seat they gave you, fit into the job they expected, fit into the ceiling that was already built before you took your first step. And the tragedy, the quiet, invisible tragedy, is that you started to believe the ceiling was the sky. You must understand this. You must understand it fully, or you will spend the rest of your life mistaking your cage for your character. The voice in your head that says, "Who do you think you are?" that is not your voice. The hesitation that stops you before you raise your hand, before you ask for the raise, before you start the company, before you make the call that is not instinct, that is inheritance. You inherited smallness the way you inherited a surname. Nobody asked you if you wanted it. It was simply given. The old you accepted the inheritance without question. The old you nodded along when they said, "Know your place." The old you shrank in rooms so that others would feel comfortable. The old you apologized for wanting more. The old you is going to have to die. Not because the old you was weak in body, not because the old you was foolish in mind, but because the old you was trained the way a dog is trained the way a plant is bent toward a wall, until it forgets it was ever meant to climb toward the sun. Napoleon Hill wrote it plainly, nearly a century ago, and the world has not caught up to it since. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But notice he did not say whatever the mind was permitted to conceive. He did not say whatever the mind was taught to believe. He said conceive. He said believe. Both of those are choices. And both of those choices were stolen from you before you were old enough to know they were yours to make. You must take them back. You must take back the right to conceive of a life larger than the one they mapped for you. You must take back the right to believe in a version of yourself they never showed you in any classroom, any family gathering, any small, quiet town. Somewhere, right now, there is a version of you that does not flinch when opportunity knocks. A version of you that does not shrink in the boardroom. A version of you that hears, "Who do you think you are?" and answers, without hesitation, "I know exactly who I am." Do you? That version of you was never given permission to exist, so he must take it. Nobody is coming to unlock the cage. There is no ceremony. There is no announcement. There is only the decision made alone, in silence, usually at the exact moment you feel most tired of being small. You must decide, today, that smallness was never safety. It was slow surrender. You must decide that the caution they gave you was not protection. It was a leash. and you have been wearing it so long you forgot it had a collar. You must decide that every be realistic you ever heard was someone else's fear, wearing the costume of wisdom. Here is the part they never tell you. The people who programmed you to stay small were not your enemies. Most of them loved you. Most of them were terrified for you, and of the world, and of the idea that you might reach further than they ever dared, and either fail spectacularly or succeed and leave them behind. Smallness is contagious because fear is contagious. And fear, when it is dressed as love, is the hardest chain to see, let alone break. But you are not required to carry their fear forward. You did not sign a contract that says the size of your life must match the size of theirs. You are allowed right now, in this moment, without asking anyone to become someone none of them recognize. The old you needed their approval. The new you needs only their forgiveness, if he needs anything from them at all. The old you shrank so the room could stay comfortable. The new you will make rooms uncomfortable, because growth always does, and comfort was never the goal. The old you asked, is this allowed? The new you asks only, is this true, and is it mine? Stand up straighter than they taught you to. Speak plainer than they told you was polite. Want more than they said was reasonable. Because reasonable is just another word for the size of cage someone else was comfortable giving you. You were not born small. You were made small by people who did not know any better, in a world that rewards obedience over ambition right up until the moment someone refuses to obey, and builds something the whole world has to notice. Let that someone be you. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient, not when you finally feel ready, because ready is a feeling they also programmed you to wait for forever, so you would never actually move. Today, burn the ceiling, bury the old inheritance, and walk plainly, deliberately, without asking permission into the size of life you are always capable of before anyone ever told you to sit down. Now I want you to remember something specific, not a feeling, not a vague memory, a moment. Go back to the exact instant, you know, the one when you had an idea so big it scared you, and you said it out loud to someone you trusted, and they looked at you the way you look at a child who says he's going to be an astronaut. That look, that small, polite, condescending smile, that was the moment the program updated itself inside you. That was the moment you learned it was safer to keep the big ideas to yourself and let the small ones out in public, where they wouldn't threaten anyone. You have been editing yourself down ever since, editing your ambition down to something palatable, editing your voice down to something quiet enough not to embarrass the room, editing your goals down to something so modest that failure would barely sting and success would barely matter. That is not modesty. That is a defense mechanism disguised as a personality. You must see it for what it is. You must see that every time you shrink a goal to be practical, you are not protecting yourself from failure. You are protecting the people around you from having to watch you become something they never gave themselves permission to become. That is not your job. You were never assigned the task of keeping other people comfortable with their own unlived lives. Let me tell you what smallness actually costs you, because nobody ever puts a number on it. Nobody ever sits you down and says, here is the price of playing it safe, itemized, in full. It cost you the business you never started, because you decided the market was too competitive when the truth was you were too afraid of being seen trying and failing. It cost you the promotion you never asked for, because you told yourself you'd wait until you were ready, as if readiness has ever once arrived on schedule for anyone in the history of ambition. It cost you the conversation you never had, the apology you never gave, the love you never pursued. because somewhere in you a small programmed voice whispered, "Don't." And you obeyed it the way you obeyed every other instruction handed to you before you were old enough to question it. Multiply that by every year you've been alive. Multiply the small decisions, the small hesitations, the small surrenders by 365 days, by every year since the wall went up around you. That number is not a number of dollars. It is not a number of promotions. It is the size of a second life you never got to live a shadow self, walking a parallel road, doing everything you were too conditioned to attempt. He is still out there. He is not gone. He is only waiting for you to stop obeying. Here is where most men stop listening. Here is where the old programming kicks back in and says, "This is just a video. This is just words. Nothing changes because you heard a speech." That voice is lying to you again, the same way it has lied to you your entire life. Because the truth is, nothing ever changes from comfort. Nothing ever changes from more information. You already know what you need to do. You have known for years. What you have lacked is not knowledge. What you have lacked is the willingness to be seen breaking the mold everyone agreed to stay inside of. Napoleon Hill did not build his philosophy on comfort. He built it on decision. He studied over 500 of the most successful men of his era, and he found the same truth in every single one of them. They made a decision, quickly and firmly, and they rarely, if ever, reversed it. The mass is his word, not mine. The masses are characterized by indecision, multiplied 1,000 times over. Every uncertain moment stacked on top of the last, until an entire life is built on a foundation of maybe later. You do not want to be the masses. You already know this. That is why you are still listening. So decide. Decide right now, in this exact moment, that you are done asking for permission from ghosts. Because that is what you have been doing, asking for permission from people who are not even in the room. Parents who raised you out of fear. Teachers who mistook obedience for intelligence. Old friends who called your ambition not realistic, because your ambition made their own stillness impossible to ignore. None of them are here right now. None of them can see you. And yet you still perform smallness for an audience that isn't watching. Stop performing for ghosts. I want to show you what the other side looks like, because most men who stay small do it because nobody ever painted them a vivid enough picture of what waits for them if they don't. Picture it. Picture the version of you standing in a room he built with his own decisions, not inherited, not permitted. Built. A room full of people who chose to be there because of what you created, not out of obligation, not out of blood, but out of respect earned in the open field of consequence. Picture the quiet, private confidence of a man who no longer flinches when someone asks, "Who do you think you are?" Because he has already answered that question 1,000 times. In 1,000 small decisions nobody else witnessed. Picture your name, spoken by people you will never meet, attached to something that outlives the room you are sitting in right now. That is not fantasy. That is simply what happens to a man who stops asking small questions and starts asking large ones. Who do I have to become to make this real? That is a large question. What is safe? That is a small one, and it has kept more men frozen at the starting line than any actual danger ever has. You must ask yourself honestly, without flinching, how many years have you spent optimizing for safety instead of significance? How many rooms have you shrunk in just to keep the temperature comfortable for everyone but you? How many times have you called it patience when it was really fear wearing a more respectable name? The old you needed a guarantee before he would move. The new you understands that guarantees were never on offer, not for you, not for Hill's 500 men, not for anyone who has ever built something that mattered. The old you waited for the fear to leave before taking action. The new you takes the action and lets the fear follow behind, arriving late as it always does, long after the decision has already been made. This is the mastermind principle Hill spoke of, not just a room of collaborators, but a room of minds no longer operating on borrowed fear, a room where nobody is performing smallness for the comfort of the group, a room where ambition is not suspicious, it is expected. You will not find that room by staying where you are. You will have to build it, plank by plank, decision by decision, the same way every man before you who refused to stay small had to build it alone, at first, and then gradually surrounded. Here is your instruction, plain and unambiguous. Pick one place in your life where you have been editing yourself down, one goal you quietly shrank to keep the peace, one version of yourself you buried so the room could stay comfortable. Dig it back up. Say it out loud, even if no one else is in the room to hear it, especially if no one else is in the room to hear it. Because that is where the old programming loses its grip. It was built on an audience. It cannot survive in a room where you no longer perform for anyone. You were not born small. You were handed smallness, the way you were handed a language, a name, a set of manners passed down, not chosen, absorbed before you had the tools to reject it. But a language can be unlearned. A name can be changed. And smallness, the very thing you have mistaken for your personality for years, can be put down. Today, the same way you would put down a coat that no longer fits the size of the man wearing it. Take it off. Walk into the size of life that was always yours to claim, and stop asking the ghosts of every room you ever shrank in for permission you never needed in the first place. The old you is dead. Let him stay that way.